The first time I read The Lord of the Rings, one of the greatest questions I had was, what happened to the elves? Why were they destined to slowly fail as a race unless they went to Valinor, the Undying Lands? Why did they have a certain sadness around them? And what caused their yearning for the sea? And what would happen if they chose to fight and not follow this urge? Hello friends, it's Carl here, and today we'll be discussing why the elves had to return to Valinor. So first we'll discuss what causes this need to go to the Undying Lands. And there isn't one simple answer for this. In fact, there are several. However, all of these can coexist together, and I believe they're all contributing factors. When the elves awakened in Middle-earth, one of the Valar, Orome, was sent to find them and escort them to Valinor. Some followed him across the seas, while others were afraid of the journey, and they chose to settle in Middle-earth. Later on, some of those elves that had reached Valinor chose to return to Middle-earth against the will of the Valar. And yet, as time passed, they started yearning to return back to the Undying Lands. It would seem that they were meant to live there. Tolkien wrote that they wanted the peace and bliss and perfect memory of the West, and yet to remain on the ordinary earth, where their prestige as the highest people, above wild elves, dwarves and men, was greater than at the bottom of the hierarchy of Valinor. This seems to encourage the idea that the Undying Lands was meant for them, and that it was their pride that drove them to choose Middle-earth over it. In the Quenta Silmarillion, we're told, "Then Eonwe, as herald of the Elder King, summoned the elves of Beleriand to depart from Middle-earth." And in Tolkien's letters, letter number 131, Tolkien seems to suggest that this invitation wasn't as polite as it seemed. He says, "We learn that the exiled elves were, if not commanded, at least sternly counseled to return into the West, and there be at peace." Now, considering all this, we can't say for certain whether they were always destined to live there, or if it was an adaptive plan created by the Valar due to the trouble that Middle-earth was experiencing. It could also be due to the next two reasons that I'll be discussing shortly, and so I thought at the very least I should mention this. So the next reason is one of the more important ones, and yet very few people are familiar with it. And it all starts with Moregot. Moregot was the first and greatest Dark Lord, and he was initially the greatest of the Valar. The Valar were the powerful angelic spirits that helped create the world, directly under the command of the one god Eru Ilúvatar. The Valar helped Ilúvatar create the world, and during its creation, Moregot poured out some of his own personal influence and rebellious nature into the world. Later on, Moregot rebels against Ilúvatar and becomes the first Dark Lord of Middle-earth, and he starts building forts and claiming the land there. At this point, he also started to pour out his evil and malice directly into the land and its substance, corrupting it to a degree. This made the world imperfect compared to its initial plan, something called Arda Mard, and this plays a prominent role in the departure of the elves. In the Lord of the Rings mythos, the elves consist of two parts: their spirit, also called their Fëa, and their physical body, also called the Hroar. Now we know that their physical form was made from the earth itself, and it therefore contained traces of Morgoth's taint. In one of Tolkien's writings, called Atrabet Finrod Ach Andret, the elf Finrod says the following about their bodies: that they will prove less strong to last than they were designed to be, which is basically saying that their bodies were weaker or less perfect than they were initially planned to be. He also talks about the taint of Moregot, saying, "You live in Arda Mard, as do we, and all the matter of Arda was tainted by him, before ye or we came forth, though this may not be clearly revealed for many years." Now, apart from this initial corruption, the elves would live and rely upon the land for food and survival, and so with time this taint would grow, making their bodies weaker and less substantial. Now their spirit, on the other hand, was not made from the earth. Instead, it was given to them by Eru Iluvatar, and it therefore did not diminish like their body. Now since their body with time diminished, while their spirit remained strong, this would cause a conflict of sorts, something which Tolkien called fading. In the History of Middle-earth, Volume 10, Tolkien wrote, and I quote, "As ages passed, the dominance of their Fear ever increased, consuming their bodies, as has been noted. The end of this process is their fading, as men have called it, for the body becomes at last, as it were, a mere memory held by the Fear." In the same book, Tolkien discusses elven children and says, "For in their early days, elf children delighted still in the world about them, and the fire of their spirit had not consumed them." In both of these examples, Tolkien implies that with time their bodies would give in, and all that would remain of the elves was their Fear, their spirit. What isn't very clear is whether their spirit would burn out their body, since Tolkien said that their spirit would consume the body, or if the body would just fail with time, and thus only their spirit would persist. So what happens to an elf when they fade? It seems with time their body starts to lose form, and they become more like a wraith. The way Tolkien describes them seems very ghost-like. He says, "The lingerers, whose bodily forms may no longer be seen by us mortals, or seen only dimly and fitfully." Now at this point, they could still return to Valinor if they desired, but it must still be a horrible fate to see one's body slowly fade away while their spirit burnt bright. Both the soul and the body were supposed to coexist together, so I think it would feel similar to having a significant aspect of an elf's being torn apart. Now this whole issue about spirits, bodies, and fading gives rise to more questions. How long does it take for an elf to fade? For this, in the books, there aren't any known examples, so it must occur at a tremendous age, but we're told that this will still be their inevitable fate, unless they choose to return to Valinor, cause there, this bodily consumption would be stopped. Another question is, what about elf children and the newer generation? Would the older elves pass on this bodily weakness to their children? Or would the new generation take as much time to fade as the older one? Regarding this, we're never told or have anything to hint at either answer, though my own personal belief is that each generation would last as long as the other. Finally, the last question is, would all elves fade at the same rate? Now here we'd have to consult Tolkien's writings again. So we know that when Moregot spread his evil in the world, it didn't affect all things equally. For example, the stars were completely untainted by Moregot, and we're told that the sea held very little of his corruption in it. Therefore, elves that live near the sea, or in other regions that were relatively spared from Morgot's taint, would logically take longer to fade, cause the resources they used and lived upon had less of Morgot's corruption in them. Though again, this is just my own speculation. Just as an interesting fact, there is a quote in the books that at first glance seems unimportant, but after knowing about elves fading, it might give it a new meaning. During Aragorn's coronation, Gandalf tells him, "For the time comes of the dominion of men, and the elder kindred shall fade or depart." Now whether this just means that their population would diminish with time, or if it was literally talking about fading is up to interpretation, but I thought I should point it out. So the last cause, and probably the most important one, behind the elves having to leave Middle-earth is the emotional burden they must have felt. We're told, the love of the elves for their land and their works is deeper than the deeps of the sea, and their regret is undying and cannot ever wholly be assuaged. The elves have a special bond with the land that they live in, perhaps because they themselves are made from it. Now some of them have seen countless ages of war and change warp their land, and for someone who is immortal, it would seem as if all of this is changing and dying in an instant. This is very different to how men perceive the world. In Tolkien's writing, Athrabet Finrod Ach Andret, Finrod says, "To me, the difference seems like that between one who visits a strange country and abides there a while, but need not, and one who has lived in that land always and must. To the former, all things that he sees are new and strange, and in that degree lovable. To the other, all things are familiar, the only things that are his own, and in that degree precious." This compares how men and elves view the world. The elves seem to be fighting the passage of time itself, that of the nature and life surrounding them, a fight that they are bound to lose eventually. One must also consider that all the pains, bad memories, and losses they've suffered would go back for thousands of years in some cases, and this would obviously build up, for they would cause scars that time could not heal. I feel a good metaphor to better understand this is, imagine you are immortal, and yet everything around you isn't. You make friends, you get accustomed to nature, your surrounding, the life around you, and yet, in what must seem like an instant to you, they're all gone. You must then repeat the cycle all over again. How long could you go without getting tired of this, and wanting to go somewhere where things were more permanent? For the elves, Valinor was this place, their home, their only chance to avoid their body burning out, and a place where they could live in peace and perfection, along with the land that they lived in. For we know that in Valinor, nature and the land grew old at an extraordinarily slow pace, if at all, and thus it would seem a lot more natural and fitting for the elves. Despite all this, there were ways to prevent all of it. For example, we're told that the elven rings of power had their power in preservation and healing, and therefore they were able to empower and preserve the nature and land surrounding them, thereby seemingly halting the passage of time. However, after the One Ring was destroyed, the elven rings eventually lose their power, and all the magic that was worked through them would fade soon. And thus it comes at no surprise why these elves also chose to leave. I think it also makes us appreciate their selflessness more, for they were ready to sacrifice their realms, lands, and happiness to defeat Sauron. Anyway guys, this wraps up the video and I hope you enjoyed it. I'm curious to know what you think, if some of the elves faded eventually, or if all of them made their way to the Undying Lands. So write a comment below telling me. If you enjoyed this video, drop a like and subscribe to join our fellowship today. I hope to see you all in my next video, where together we can once again explore the wonderful world and lore of Middle-earth.